Hello, my friends, and welcome to the Two Trees Podcast. I'm John Dillon. I'm here with Martin Listner.
Hey, y'all.
Jacob Kessling.
What's up, guys?
Rose Moeller.
Hi, everybody.
And Jeremy is back and just hanging out with us today. He's been road tripping, lots of businessy stuff, but he's back and just having a good time with us. We have been whiteboarding, talking about this theme that seems to be running through the Bible, the idea of God being the provider. And really this imagery comes into play when we start looking at temple meals, sacred meals, the concept of covenant meals. And we talked about it. It was originally brought up in our discussion about the golden calves that Jeroboam put up there in Bethel, and then another one in Dan. And we were reading this, and God got really angry at the prophet for eating. And we go like, wow, that seems like a lot of anger just towards a meal. And we started digging into it and studying it. It turns out the Bible actually makes a big deal about this concept of provision and God providing and where do the goods and treasures in our life come from. And so that's what we've been talking about. We were looking at the Garden of Eden as really the archetype for this idea that God provided for the world. He created two types of reality, a physical reality and a supernatural reality. And in the Garden of Eden, these two were made to be together. Mankind was made outside of the garden and then brought into the garden, where he acted as a priest in this temple that God had set him up. He had a job, and that everything was provided for him by the hand of the Lord. And then we find that there's rebellion that comes into play. And if you're interested in this, you can go back and check out the other episode. But as the Bible progresses, this idea isn't done away with. It actually gets dug into and morphs into 3 or 4 other images that really have to do with the idea of rebellion. Satan desires to mimic what God is doing. And that's not something that should be news to you, but it is something that's going to be important to this idea. It isn't just that he wants to be in charge. He wants what God has. And a lot of the things that God sets up, Satan mimics. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. You guys are with me so far?
So far, so good.
Yeah, it has me thinking, and I know we don't have time for in this episode. So if the cults are using some type of power or whatever the case is, would that be possible that God created it and then Satan's using it for bad?
Oh yeah, totally possible.
Okay. I mean, it's just...
What would an example be of that?
Like, I'm thinking about like astral projection and those kinds of things.
Oh, sure.
Like, is it possible? I have some friends that were in the New Age stuff in the younger age, and they were experiencing this stuff. And so anyway, I was just thinking through that, because a lot of times we give...
Believe it or not, we're actually going to hit a little bit of that in this episode.
Okay. Yes.
It's in the Bible.
Beautiful.
And so there is a weird part in the end of our story because we love the weird corners of the Bible.
That's right.
So obviously, Jacob read ahead and knows.
Yeah, I saw it on page 6.
Did you really?
No. No.
Look, this is the first outline he's ever read.
This is great. I opened it up. That's about as far as I got.
I think really if we were going to pick like a spot to launch this, it has to be the Deuteronomy 32 worldview. And we're not going to dig into this a ton because Mike Chu and others have broken this down for us, and we have other episodes about it. But really, if you had to define what happened at the Tower of Babel, most people are going to tell you that story is just about, and that's where languages come from.
Right. That's where Ken Ham and the ministry over there, a lot of times, yeah, that's explanation of the languages. But Deuteronomy 32 takes it to a whole other level of what's happening.
Yeah, the Bible seems to indicate like there's a whole supernatural saga taking place. There are more characters involved, and what happens is God divides the nations up, and he places over them governors, spiritual shepherds. Whether those are fallen or unfallen angelic beings is kind of up in the air. There's arguments to be made both sides.
So are you saying he would have put fallen beings over?
Yeah, the book of Romans seems to indicate that God gave them over to what they wanted. And so if it is the case that mankind is like, we want to worship the fallen gods, that God would say, fine. All right, if that's what you want to do, I'll put you underneath their authority, but I am still king. I am still God. Mm-hmm. The other view that Mike Heiser put out, and he's super smart, so kudos to him, is that these were unfallen archangel-type persons who rebelled after they were given the responsibility of shepherding the nations back to the Lord, that instead they thought, why can't I just be the God? Why do I have to bring them back to the Lord?
So when I imagine this, at first in my childhood thought process years ago, as I'm thinking about the Tower of Babel story, is that people are like, hey, we speak the same language. Let's go live over here.
Mm-hmm.
Do you feel like there was kind of a driving, as like a shepherd will drive their cattle to these areas that would be, and they all spoke the same language or whatever for communication purposes?
I think that's exactly what happened.
All right. That's how I'm thinking now, but there's just not a lot of detail in there, so I just love the idea of imagining these things.
Yeah, so the idea that these priests, these people who were worshiping these gods, were just praying and they weren't getting anything back is I think, a little bit of a stretch. There is a supernatural world that desires to communicate, that desires to confuse and to deceive. And I think they were told things.
Right.
That this doesn't mean it's necessarily true. It's propaganda from a satanic, meaning like the enemy's version of these things. But yeah, I think they were definitely talking and being talked back to.
Okay.
I think we covered that quite a bit in the Balaam episodes.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of this, guys, if you haven't been following along with us as we studied through this, you're just going to have to take our word that we've spent hours talking about this.
I just love the idea, like back to the Tower of Babel story of like, here they are being creative. And let's build, like my kids building a Lego tower. That's what we would, who could build, how big of a tower you can build. Just to be real cute about this. It's like, well, what's the intention that's taking place where God comes? It's almost like he was busy doing other things. All of a sudden he looks down like, what are they building? Oh my goodness.
Yeah.
Like, what's their intention of what they're doing at this point in time?
I think you're definitely onto something with them being led. The people that were building the tower being led to a certain even geographical area or just a same thought process to be able to put this tower together. And I don't know if you're going to title the episode this, but satanic counterfeits is what you have listed on the outline. And working in the banking industry, if you have a counterfeit bill, if it looks nothing like the original bill, then there's no belief in it, right? Mm-hmm. You know it's not real. But the more you can make it like the original, the same way that these other beings are acting as if they are the Most High God, the more people are going to follow them or believe that they are the real thing.
And I think that that's a really good, I like that you brought up the banking concept of that, because Satan is not interested in just redoing everything his own way. He's interested in having what God has. There's an appeal to it. And so in a lot of ways, there's a purposeful mirroring of what God had set in motion. The Tower of Babel is really a man-made mountain. It's a place where God and man, or the gods and men, are in the same
like
space.
in Eden, where it would have been. They would have been trying to recreate.
And we find this all through the Bible, that whenever people are interested in offering a sacrifice or there's a supernatural element going on, you find the phrase, go up, go up. That this is a reoccurring image that happens over and over and over again because it had cultural significance to the people who were living these stories. And so when we read them, it's not just extra information. The Bible doesn't actually give us a ton of extra information. It's really vague about what did Moses look like, what did the Hebrews dress like. It gives us little bits of things. But if the Bible is being specific, it's a good habit to notice it and say, why is it being specific? Why is it telling me that this is uphill? It's not trying to paint a picture. It's trying to communicate something with you. And so when we start dealing with this idea of spiritual or supernatural powers that are desiring to imitate what it is that God is doing, we kind of pull away from just the idea that there's Satan, the bad guy, and God, the good guy. There's a whole host of bad guys. There's the host of heaven, the fallen watchers that are described. And probably one of the most interesting passages that talks about this is in the book of Daniel, chapter 10. And so let's jump then to verses 3 through 5 of Daniel chapter 10. So the background that you're getting here is the prophet Daniel has been praying. He's asking God for his help. He's asking God to reveal something to him. And that's where the verse picks up in verse 3.
I ate no delicacies, no meat or wine entered my mouth, nor did I anoint myself at all for the full 3 weeks. On the 24th day of the first month, as I was standing on the bank of the great river, that is, the Tigris, I lifted up my eyes and looked, and behold, a man clothed in linen, with a belt of fine gold from Uphaz around his waist.
So right away, we're introduced to the idea that Daniel is fasting fasting is connected to this idea of temple meals, that I am not going to feed myself. I'm going to wait for God to come to me. I'm trying to show my longing for God by denying myself a physical good. It's not just dieting, all right? That's not what fasting is. It's not just saying I'm not going to eat. It's a way of expressing my longing for God. And so it's interesting to me that the way we do that fundamentally is through food, lacks of food, lack of drink. Fasting and prayer go together in Scripture. But to us, fasting isn't really that big of a deal for most people. They may talk about prayer, but we fast from things like Facebook. We fast from things like, I'm not going to have, or
No
Lent is
sweets.
probably, we fast from a very specific thing.
All right.
Biblically, you don't find people like, I'm going to fast from, I don't know, growing cucumbers this year. That's not what I'm going to do. We find that it is very much connected to health, to providing for, and I'm not saying you can't fast from Facebook or those kind of things, but biblically speaking, there's more to it than just that. And it connects to this idea of meals. And so he's not eating, he's fasting, he's longing for the Lord, and all of a sudden a priest-like figure shows up. This is a supernatural being dressed as a priest. Let's jump down to verse 18.
Again, one having the appearance of a man touched me and strengthened me, and he said, O man, greatly loved, fear not. Peace be with you. Be strong and of good courage. And as he spoke to me, I was strengthened and said, Let my Lord speak, for you have strengthened me. Then he said, Do you know why I have come to you? But now I will return to fight against the prince of Persia. And when I go out, behold, the prince of Greece will come. But I will tell you what is inscribed in the book of truth. There is none who contends by my side against these except Michael, your prince.
So every other time I have read this text, I have focused in on Prince of Persia, Prince of Greece, because it's fascinating. Mm-hmm. This seems to be two supernatural beings who are opposed to the will of God. These are fallen watchers, and they are they are purposefully trying to sabotage God's messenger to Daniel. What I want to focus on here is not just that those beings exist. They are there. They are supernatural principalities, powers, rulers of the darkness of this world, and they're revealed in the text. But did you catch what happened when the angel appeared to Daniel?
I strengthened him.
He was strengthened. Mm-hmm. It says, I haven't eaten, I haven't drunk anything, I'm pretty smelly, but when the angel came, he touched me, and I was strengthened. The idea is that this is what he's been longing for.
Isn't this the same words that were used with Jesus?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, all right. Am I jumping ahead
you
to
but
page 6?
No, that's
Did read the notes, Rose.
Actually, I did, and that's probably why it stuck in my head. Or just the minister.
No, I think
angels
this
came
is a
and ministered
super
to him.
neat thought to me, that it isn't just like the angel showed up and strengthened him like, do good deeds, or, just encouraged him. There's a physical reaction that Daniel has to the supernatural presence of the messenger of God. And suddenly, it's revealed that there's a battle taking place between the servants of the Lord and rebellious powers in the world.
This seems to be a theme in Daniel, him refraining, fasting, choosing certain things to eat. He does this other times in previous chapters.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
In fact, the one I think right before this, he is also praying and fasting and having another conversation with yet a different messenger or a different angel. I think Gabriel comes.
Yeah, fasting is, we're going to have to do a whole episode just on fasting.
Yeah,
but it isn't just a standalone idea. I think we like our food concepts, no touching, like not mashed potatoes and gravy, just like mashed potatoes. And so this idea that these topics overlap and they run over into each other is because they're expressions of love and loyalty to God. The Lord is our provider. The Lord is our shepherd. I shall not want, is connected to this idea. So then when I'm longing for God, there is a sense in which physical food gives us a beautiful way of describing this.
So what would be the purpose in, I know this is, you said we'll do one on fasting and that's fine, but if we're talking about sacred meals, it must have two different purposes, either eating a sacred meal or fasting, because they're completely opposite things, but it feels like you're doing the same thing to commune with God in some way.
One is to say we are in fellowship and all is well. The other is to express longing. So Adam and Eve are in the garden, and they are provided everything that they could possibly want to eat. It's given to them by the hand of the Lord. It grows, and their job is to work and keep the garden. When they are pushed out of the garden, suddenly scarcity is involved in the story. And we find Adam and Eve longing to be back in the garden. I don't know that we'll fast in heaven like that. The Lord will be right there. The Bible kind of talks about this with Jesus. He says, why would you fast when the bridegroom is present? This idea is that we are in a broken world. There is a supernatural war going on. And this concept of sacred meals, communion, fasting, all of this is an expression of that. And so if you think that, the Bible is just telling me that they sat down to eat again, you're missing part of the story. There's an underlying reason for this, and it has to do with the desire of the enemy. God is at war, not just with physical sin, but with supernatural evil. There are rebels in both worlds. In the book of Exodus 12:12, it says that he is going to strike the firstborn of Egypt, man and beast, and on all the gods of Egypt I will execute judgments. I am the Lord. This is what God is doing in the Passover. And so we want to understand this. What is it that the enemy wants? And there we're going to jump into the book of Isaiah.
Before we move on, can I ask a small question?
Yeah, go ahead.
It's about the Prince of Persia and the Prince of Greece.
Mm-hmm.
I know that because they're in here, they exist. But is this like a chronological thing? First, he's going to fight Persia, then he's going to fight Greece. And those are both ones that come in and take over this geographical area. So is that what he's saying? Is that when Persia is here, I'm going to fight him, and when Greece is here, I'm going to fight him?
Oh, man.
Because it sounds more like Fight Club, like spiritual.
Well, we don't talk about Fight Club.
Okay.
What do you think, Jacob?
I was thinking about something totally different in this. I was trying to link, what's happening in the spiritual realm against these new wars against Persia or Greece or whatever, and then the kings that parallel the physical kings. And is there a connection that way? I'm just always blown away, like what exactly is going on around us. And then I was also thinking about going even back further to our first topic and looking at the Tower of Babel and what was leading the building of that. And for some reason, I have the name Nimrod, but I'm not sure where that content comes from as far as him leading the building of the tower.
Most people assume that Nimrod is the fellow who organizes the building of the Tower of Babel.
And then what's what supernatural power is behind that, and is he a Nephilim? I have all those kinds of questions. I mean, what's happening in the physical realm seems to be paralleling what's going on in the rebellion in the spiritual realm too, and so it seems like we see these parallels of a physical rebellion, but also a spiritual kind of thing just taking place.
Yeah,
and this angel that's trying to give aid to Daniel is having to fight territorial spirits to try to get to him.
When we read in the beginning of the rebellion in Eden, mankind, womankind, Adam and Eve are there, and they are physically sinning in the garden. But they are not alone. There is a supernatural agent prodding them on.
Right.
The next story, Cain and Abel. God tells Cain, get yourself under control because sin is crouching at the door.
Yeah.
Again, that idea that there is a supernatural agency that desires to move you, to shape you to its will. And so the reason I brought up the divine counsel and the Deuteronomy 32 worldview is that it's wrong to view these just as human players in a completely neutral field.
Isolated storyline. Yeah.
There are powers behind them manipulating the stories. None of this is happening in isolation. What's happening in the physical world, like the rise of empires that Rose is talking about, is also taking place in the supernatural world. Okay. How exactly that looks, I'm not sure. But what I do know is that the world is more than we think it is and not less.
That's right.
It doesn't mean I get to say, well, it's not my fault. Flip Wilson used to say the devil made me do it. The devil didn't make me do it. I did it, but there is a tempter. There is an enemy that walks about as a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour. And then in Exodus, when we read that, we get the idea that there are powers behind Pharaoh, that he's not in isolation. Now, there are these gods who have said, I am the Nile, or I am the sun. And they present themselves with all this mythology and all this trappings, and it's a lie. It's not true. there is a supernatural being there, but it's propaganda about itself. And so the Lord comes in and turns the Nile to blood, turns the sun to blackness. He's exposing their lies. And then the Egyptians seem to go just right back to worshiping them anyway. There is something broken there. We want any port except the one that is God. Give me any reason to not obey, and I'll take it. We seem to be doing. Does that make? I think that what you're talking about is huge.
Yeah, just as we're talking and everybody's asking questions, like my brain's in certain areas, but
this is why we need you, Jacob. Life is better with a Jacob.
Yeah, I agree.
John, I think you're really onto something when it's saying he touched me and strengthened me. But I'm having a hard time understanding how Daniel was understanding that this was a good thing. Because we're talking about the counterfeits. Weren't these other gods strengthening the people that were worshiping them also?
Yes.
When people reached out to them, they were getting something back. That's why they continued to go back to them. People will talk a lot in today's world that I prayed to God and he didn't answer my prayer. So he must not be real, or he must not care, or he must not whatever. And if they turn to something else and they pray to something else and their prayer is answered, that's strengthening. They're getting strength from this other being, so they then pursue this other being, saying this must be the actual God. But yet somehow Daniel gets strengthened by this priestly type thing, and he knows that that's the right one, one of God.
I think you're bringing this up is a good way to just talk about this for a moment, because we have a lot of people in our ministries who have backgrounds in the occult or have interest in these things. And I'm going to tell you right now, the Bible doesn't tell you don't talk to spirits because it doesn't work. It tells you not to do it because they're dangerous.
It's true.
And they lie.
Yep.
When people are wheeling and dealing with the darkness, you are not going to come out on top, because that being does not care about you. It wants to manipulate you. It wants to destroy you. It finds great joy in the destruction of a being who is made to image God. Mm-hmm. And so these priests are a dime a dozen. Like when you read like the prophets of Baal, they're cutting themselves, they're breaking each other up, and nothing happens. There's not one that's better than the other. They're just almost replaceable parts in this cog. The god Molech or these other guys, they're sacrificing their own children to it. It isn't that these gods don't do things. It's that they're evil. It's that they don't care about you. And God shines through as the opposite of this. Whereas in the Garden of Eden, they see and they take the fruit for themselves. I'll define right and wrong for myself. I'll take it. God gives. He's generous. There's an abundance. All the people who came forward to listen to Jesus preach in the wilderness, and he fed thousands of people. He didn't say, if you fill out this card and give me your email address and all those things, then I'll give you some food. It's just, I saw that people were hungry, and so I fed them. I saw people were broken, and so I fixed what was going on. There's this sense of generosity that you don't get when you talk about the powers of darkness. It's about sacrifice. It's about wheeling and dealing. It's about cutting a good deal, but in the end, you know you're going to lose. And so when this angel strengthens him, it's not because he's getting anything. He doesn't say, if you promise to build Yahweh a temple, or if you continue to be faithful. He sees Daniel in need and strengthens him. That's the mark of the kingdom. And that's what we're supposed to be doing. Now, I'm not an angel. I can't strengthen you by zapping strength into you. But what I can do is that if I see someone and they have need, I'm supposed to give it to them.
So if I can articulate this, God Most High is deserving of all of our praise because he acts in this way. But the fallen angels want us to praise them in order for them to act that way.
Yes.
So they are having it backwards. They desire what God has and what God deserves, but they're trying to get it in a reverse fashion, as a wheeling and dealing instead of a, I'm going to be abundant life, and so then you should praise me back.
So the Lord tells us, if you want to be first, be last. If you want to be the greatest, be a servant. And we think to ourselves, that's dumb.
Yeah.
That's not right. We have to do it this way. How can I force people to obey? That seems to be contrary to what the Bible is talking about. You read the Beatitudes, and Jesus is blessing all the wrong people. Blessed are the outsiders. Blessed are those who are mourning. This is upside down from what the world is teaching us. And so there are places in the Bible which you can pick this up just by reading through the text that describe these beings. But the prophet Isaiah, who's one of the greatest prophets, it's one of the most beautiful books in the whole Bible, he has this description of a prince, the prince of Tyre. And then all of a sudden, it seems like he stops talking about the physical human prince, and he starts talking about a supernatural entity behind him. Let's pick it up in verse 12.
How you are fallen from heaven, O day star, son of dawn. How you are cut down to the ground. You who laid the nations low. You said in your heart, I will ascend to heaven above the stars of God. I will set my throne on high. I will sit on the mount of assembly in the far reaches of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will make myself like the Most High.
Now that is the description of the motives. What is it that's going on here? Satan is being described. And if you want to know more about this, we've cut whole episodes on who is Satan. We did it early on. You can go back and listen to those. But what it says is, I want to be greater than my peers, above the stars. That's the host of heaven. I want to set my throne on high. He doesn't say I want to be lifted up. He says I want to set my throne. That's conquest language. I want to elevate myself. I don't want someone to give me a higher office. I want to take it. I want to be in the far reaches of the north. That one's a weird one. We've talked about this before, but the North Star doesn't set. All the stars orbit it. What he's saying is, I want to be the middle. I want to be the center of everything. And then he breaks it down there at the end. I want to make myself like the Most High.
Hey, can you back up on I will sit on the Mount of Assembly?
Mm-hmm.
What are we talking about there?
Mount Zaphon is a place where the Canaanites and later on people are going to believe it's kind of like a Mount Olympus.
Sure.
I want to be, when the angels assemble, I want to be the chief. I don't want God to put me up high. I want to lift myself. As a matter of fact, this would be better without him. If I could get him to serve me, that would be better. So the Mount of Assembly is this, again, that idea of an elevated place.
Gotcha.
It's kind of interesting. I think I mentioned this when we talked about the I wills of Satan several months ago. But I think Satan even understands, or any of these fallen watchers or fallen spiritual beings understand that they can't get above God. The only way to become better than God is to bring him down.
That's exactly what the next text is about.
And I think we've discussed it a couple times before, but it's just an interesting tactic, and I think it leads into that last thought that I had, is that they desire what God has, which is the right for worship. It is righteous to worship God because he is deserving of the worship. Mm-hmm. But they know they aren't deserving of it. So the only thing they can do is remove the one that is deserving of it so they can take its place. So they can change righteousness.
I think that's what
They
Satan
can
is
redefine
doing
it.
in the garden. I'm going to steal this from you.
Right.
I'm going to subvert your priests.
And he can't do that by defeating him, but by changing the rules of operation.
Right. And he's going to continue doing that. Let's jump into the Gospels and take a look at the temptation of Jesus in the book of Matthew, chapter 4, 7 through 11.
Again, the devil took him to a very high mountain.
So there again is that high place imagery. Anytime the Bible is specifically telling you this, perk your ears up. Something supernatural is taking place. Keep going.
And showed him all the kingdoms of the world and their glory.
So this is that Deuteronomy 32 concept. All the nations belong to us. They're ours. You gave them to us to shepherd, and we have taken them.
So at this point, all of them had fallen watchers or fallen beings as the helm?
Yes. They are messed up. Are there watchers who aren't fallen? Yeah, I think so. It seems to be, though, that the ones who are in charge of the nations have corrupted themselves or were corrupted already.
So Satan has them surrounded.
Yeah, so well, in a way, they feel like it, but God hasn't lost his authority. He didn't cease to be king. These are rebels who have usurped authority that's not theirs.
So let me ask you a question. So you're saying that this is reference to the rulers over the nations in Deuteronomy 32 worldview.
Yes.
Is this also in connection to Adam and Eve getting dominion or authority, and then them also giving it over to him?
Yeah, it could be.
I was thinking about these two pieces, because
Mankind
everything changes after the cross.
We are put back out of the garden, and we are suddenly under the power of death.
Okay.
There's a sense in which this rebellion is thick. It's gone way farther than Adam and Eve would have ever thought that it was going. They didn't understand.
And I don't know if I've said it on the podcast. I know I've over the last month or two, I've just been thinking about the idea of fasting for Jesus, and thinking that Satan didn't even have the courage to come against him until he was near death. This Jesus in flesh, the God man, is now near death. If he's not had anything to drink and eat, I mean, the angels coming and minister to him after this is all over with. I mean, Satan's not approaching until this God man is
Weak.
Yes, extremely weak. And then he has this courage to try to manipulate him, and he overcomes this. But I just was thinking about this, how he viewed Jesus, and being even fearful of him, that he wouldn't approach until this point, because he led him out into the wilderness. Such a weird part.
I mean, it's strategical though. Also, I mean, I understand what you're saying. Like maybe he had the courage because he was so weak, but also, why would you not attack when your opponent is at his weakest spot?
Well, that's what my friend always tells me whenever I'm having a bad time, and then you have more bad times and then more, and it just feels, she says, well, Satan is not a gentleman. He's going to kick you when you're down.
No, absolutely.
I'm like, that's a really good point.
Well, I'm just wondering if Satan would have ever approached Jesus and went in his strength, in his fullness, like in a healthy state. Here he is now in a very weak spot.
What do you think the crucifixion is?
Well, no, absolutely, 100%. But
yeah,
that's where that episode we did on Psalm 22 is so fantastic for me. And you can go back and listen to that episode.
There's a lot of what I'm trying to tell you guys is we've talked about a lot of stuff, and we can't do it all in one episode.
No,
so
that's got me perplexed. Is Satan just waiting to be with good strategy to attack when you're most vulnerable?
I don't think that he's just, but I think he does.
And so it's just that we see that because it's what's in the text. That's what we can see in the text is when Satan is able to attack. Is that something that we could apply to ourselves, is when you are most vulnerable, or when you are straying from God, when you're not strong in your prayer life and your study life and stuff, that's when Satan feels like it's a better time to attack? Not because he's like, oh, I'm more powerful now than I was before, but it's you are in a more vulnerable state, and so I'm going to do that. Because that kind of leads into like the one another's, how we're supposed to be together and to prop everybody up and stuff like that. And so that's also the full armor of God and all that. Like you lead into it. The more that we can deflect the fiery schemes of the evil one, the less he's willing to attack because of that. Or is it because it's the only time he thinks he really stood a chance?
Well, I guess
that's an interesting
My thought process is that if Jesus had to overcome the temptation of Satan and being the second Adam, the only way he can lure Satan out to come against him is in a point of such great weakness, right. And
that's what I'm thinking.
Near death. Now Satan comes out. You get what I'm saying? I mean, what I'm trying to do. This makes me think like, man. Now I know God's awesome. Jesus and God in flesh is awesome, but like this makes me like. Let's look at Satan the way he is. He is terrified of God. As much as he wants to have his spot, he has no chance. But he's still in his own pride and arrogance. Yeah. He couldn't. I wouldn't even think he would approach Jesus unless he's.
Well,
in
I
his
think he
physical form near
definitely
death.
sees the fact that God has become man as a weakness. That's
true.
why he tries to kill him.
Absolutely,
and he does. I want to.
But you think Jesus is basically baiting him out?
Well, I wonder. He's baptized, he's affirmed, and then he's led out into the wilderness for 40 days, and he's fasted. Like, what's the point of this? And perhaps this is part of that journey of facing that temptation that he needed to face.
But he's acting like, what's that bird that will act like it's hurt, so you go after it and not its babies?
Oh,
Right.
Killdeer.
Killdeer, yeah. Like, is that what
I
you're
like
kind of
it as
getting at? Where it's like,
Jinx.
Jesus is limping, like, look, I'm hurt, and then he flies
You
away
can-
right at the last
I'm
second.
going to pull us back here because I think
Why?
you can take it
Yeah, why would you pull us back? We're having such a fun time.
just because there is a danger here of somebody saying, "Oh, if I just don't allow myself to be weak, then Satan won't tempt
Right.
me," or if I can just maintain this supernatural high, then Satan won't.
I'm talking
attack
about
me.
Jesus, not us.
Well,
Like,
I'm just saying people are going to take it this way, and I want to be clear that Satan will attack you whenever
Right.
he has to, whether that means you're doing really well or that you're doing really badly. Satan is not a gentleman. He's going to come at you, but
Right.
he is afraid of Jesus. He is afraid
Yes.
of God. And look at what it is that he asks him to do. He says, verse 9.
And he said to him, "All these I will give you if you will fall down and worship me." Then Jesus said to him, "Begone, Satan, for it is written, you shall worship the Lord your God, and him only shall you serve." Then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and were ministering to him.
So Satan is speaking as though he owns the nations.
and Jesus isn't disagreeing or arguing with them. Or he doesn't go back into the tech. Yeah. Okay, I'm sorry. I don't want to take it too
No,
much.
he totally does. This is the same thing that God gave to the watchers. He says, worship me, and I will give you the nations. Satan has now perverted this, and this is a satanic counterfeit of that. You're weak. You're praying. There's no one here to help you. Why don't you just worship me, and I'll provide for you? I'll strengthen you. And the Lord replies to him by quoting the book of Deuteronomy. This is chapter 6. We're going to hit it here in just a second. But did you catch what happens when the angels do come?
Minister to
They
him.
strengthen him.
Yeah.
That idea of the Lord is providing what is needed. Jesus, even though, was he weak? Yeah, I guess if you hadn't eaten for 40 days, you'd be weak. But he's not at the point where he can't do the right thing.
Yep.
God is the victor here. And there's a Daniel-like connection here. It's interesting to me that you see Jesus quotes from Deuteronomy 6. It's Deuteronomy 6, 13 through 14. And Deuteronomy 6 is actually a famous chapter. Maybe you've heard of the Shema. Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, that whole thing. This is from just beyond that. Look at verses 13 and 14.
It is the Lord your God you shall fear. Him you shall serve, and by his name you shall swear. You shall not go after other gods, the God of the peoples who are around you.
This is what's going on. He says, don't go after the gods that are around you. Worship only the Lord. And so what is it that Jesus responds here? He says, listen, this is Deuteronomy in practice. This is what it's about. And I am here to conquer where all the others seem to have failed, where Adam failed, where others have walked willingly into sin. It makes me think of that ending of Psalm 82, arise, O God, for you shall inherit all the nations. And I just want to stand up and cheer because it's such a powerful ending. Really what we're left with is this idea that God is at war. There is an enemy that is offering things. And there is God who is offering things. There are two trees. We have to choose one or the other, whether to try to take power for ourselves or whether we recognize that God is the giver. In the book of Isaiah 66, the very last chapter of the book, God more or less tells Israel, heaven is my throne and the earth is my footstool. What is the house that you would build for me? And what is the place of my rest? All these things my hands have made. And so all these things came to be, declares the Lord. But this is the one to whom I will look. He who is humble and contrite in spirit and trembles at my word. God doesn't need mankind to give him anything. When you read pagan myth, the gods need mankind. They feed them, they worship them, they do things for them. When you go into the temples, you have this idea that they would bathe the idol, they would make the idols, they would shape them, they would serve them. God says, I don't need any of that. This is the exact opposite of that pagan idea. It isn't that God needs us to serve him. We need God to have purpose. Adam and Eve didn't say, "Oh, don't worry, God, we're here to take care of you. Now we're here to work and keep the garden." You kind of are left wondering, like, well, what exactly did they do? Like, what does working and keeping the garden even look like? Does God need gardeners? And the answer is no, God doesn't need gardeners. Does God need a council? The answer is no, God doesn't need a council. Does God need watchmen over the nations? No, God doesn't need anything, but he provides. There is abundance and there is diversity within the plan of the Lord. Look at the very end of this, because it's going to take the idea of food and drink and take it to the next level. It doesn't say, "But this is the one to whom I will look, he who is hungry and thirsty." He says, no, it is he who is humble and contrite in spirit. Jesus is going to go on to say, "Blessed are those who hunger and thirst after righteousness."
This also has some of the same words that David uses in one of his Psalms. Is it 51? Where he says, like, "Have mercy upon me, O Lord, according to thy loving." And he says, "A broken and a contrite heart you will not despise."
Yeah, this isn't about the magic of being hungry, or if you eat this food at this time, then that's satanic. This has to do with the motive. A.W. Tozer, who's a pretty famous pastor of a previous generation, used to say that the action does not rise higher than its motive, meaning that that's the defining thing. So when we find the prophet eating the meal, it matters why. What is at play? It's not a question of, oh, well, that was obviously magical beans and it made you sick and you died. It's a message that's infused into this. And so if you're just going to break it down into legalism and say, these are the foods you're not allowed to eat and these are the ones you are, you're left having misunderstood the entire thing here. The abundance of God to hunger and to thirst after righteousness. This is what is a picture of what it is that God is doing.
That's good. I was this whole time I've been thinking about just how we are in the world today in America, climbing the corporate ladder, trying to be number one. You know, again, Jesus comes on the earth and just like, this is about being in the last place. And it's so countercultural in the idea of what's humility look like. And it's not that we can't, we humble ourselves in the sight of the Lord and he lifts us up. So it's not about being in charge or being the boss. It's just that drive and desire to want to control, to want to be in the spot, to be the man. Anyway, I just been thinking about more the practical side of how we tend to be wired in the sense of, in America at least, to try to be in control, to be in charge, and even pastoral stuff. And I was also thinking about what God doesn't need, and it's like, I mean, I remember he doesn't even want this temple. You know, did I ever ask you to build me a building? You know, I never. And he lets them do it. Don't get me wrong, but this idea of is there's a deal here. If we do this building, and you guys need to worship me. If you ever go astray, I'm gone. And he, you know, of course, he abandons this temple. But I don't know. Just I have all these thoughts swirling in my mind. But one being the sense of humility in today and what how represents God the best, and then also this idea that just thinking about temple building.
Yeah, I think when you place it back in Eden and the trees, God doesn't need man. It's man that needs God.
That's right.
Without God, we have no purpose. We have no function. We have no existence. And so the idea then that we can, God, if you'll just do what I want, then I will give you.
Right. Why is this so? It's so hard. I don't know why to have a conversation with some individuals to say that there's a divine counsel or that God shares his rulership with humanity in the garden, and because it always immediately goes to he doesn't need you. We know that, but it does show like what God and how God chooses to rule, and this idea of sharing is weird for us because it somehow it connotates a need, and it just isn't. God chooses to rule that way.
God doesn't have any needs.
He doesn't.
And honestly, Paul later on is going to say, I have learned in whatever state I am therein to be content, that my needs are provided for by the hand of my Lord. And so just like Adam and Eve in the garden were provided for by the Lord, so the servants of the Lord today are provided for by the hand of the Lord. And we participate in that. We're generous to one another. We share with one another. We protect one another. We find ways to be useful to our society. We work our job. We do all these things as unto the Lord. It's an act of worship. when you separate the motive of worship from these things, you cheapen them all, and you turn them into just a mere hunter-gatherer society that's just out to get a couple more dollars.
John, I think you had an illustration one time in one of your sermons that I happened to listen to about, God sharing the responsibilities. If we have a mess of toys on the ground, I don't need my son to pick them up. Like, I don't need his help to pick them up. In fact, it's worse when he picks them up because it takes longer. It's not as effective. It's whatever. So as far as me delegating some of that help to him, it makes the whole situation not as effective. But it's building a relationship with a father and a son together is why I allow him the privilege,
I think that's exactly
to take in some of this responsibility. Not because I need his help or need his whatever, but it's because I desire to have a relationship with him the same way God desires a relationship with his creation. And that's why we are given the opportunity to take a part of some of these things.
Yeah, I agree. I think that God is...
Well, it came
It
from
was your
you,
illustration.
so-
So you have to agree with it.
I still agree with that.
That's a good one, though. I like that.
But the Divine Counsel thing, for me, the first time I read Michael Heiser's book, I pushed back on it hard because it was so very different, and I thought it was polytheistic. And I thought it was saying, like, and in my mind, I was defending God by saying he doesn't need these things. But what I had to do was to say, okay, he doesn't need these things. Now the question is, how does the Bible describe what is happening?
Yeah.
It's not that God needs someone in charge of this or needs someone in charge of that. It's that he has given responsibilities to both humans and to supernatural beings. And some of their responsibilities are big and some of them are small. And I am not the one that judges them. It's the Lord who does these things. My calling is to be faithful. My calling is to serve and not to try to manipulate and to gather wealth and power through my own cunning, but to be a blessing to the world. Now, that doesn't mean you shouldn't work hard at your job, but that means you shouldn't recognize that you should recognize that you're not the power you think you are. That unless the Lord builds the house, they labor in vain that build it. That the Lord is with you. You're not in isolation, is what I'm trying to tell you. The Lord is with you, but there are other things that desire to manipulate you as well. There is a story that I think shows this in the book of Kings, in the book of 2 Kings, chapter 5. And you guys are probably really familiar with this story because of it's a baptism miracle story. But I want to focus on the part of the story that doesn't get talked about so much. There's a man named Naaman, and he is a Syrian general. He's worshiping a god called Baal Hadad or Baal Ramon, and he has leprosy, some sort of skin disease. And the Lord heals him by his humbling himself, going into the Jordan River, dunking 7 times, and then coming up, and his leprosy is gone. Now, that's the part of the story that most people, they really like because it's cool. What happens after that is the part that I want to focus on. So let's start in 2 Kings chapter 5, verses 15 and 16.
Then he returned to the man of God, he and all his company. And he came and stood before him, and he said, Behold, I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. So accept now a present from your servant. But he said, As the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I will receive none. And he urged him to take it, but he refused.
So this is one of the most powerful men in the world. This is a general, and he's not alone. Did you notice there that he and all his company, he has come, and they have just seen the hand of God at work. This man has been miraculously healed. The prophet spoke to them. They obeyed his voice, and God came through. There's been provision here. And so this is one of the fallen servants of Babylon standing before the servant of the Lord, and it is night and day. This is a God who truly has power, who truly cares for his people. And he's there, and the very first thing he says, Behold, I know that there is no God in all the earth but in Israel. Let me give you something. Let me give you something. You don't have enough. I am wealthy. And he must have looked at the prophet and thought, I will give you a gift. And this is ancient culture. You gave great gifts when you were in the company of great people. That was what you didn't visit a king and bring him ramen noodles. Okay, you showed up with something impressive, and if you didn't have a great gift, you didn't go visit the king. That's just how it worked. So when he offers to give to Elisha something, Elisha says no. This is a small picture of what God is doing. The nations are going to return. And he says, look at verse 16. Martin, would you read verse 16 for me there again?
But he said, "As the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I will receive none." And he urged him to take it, but he refused.
As the Lord lives, before whom I stand. It's almost as though Elisha is there, and Naaman is there, and there is a supernatural audience there as well.
That he can see.
This is not a moment where Naaman is going to be able to give Elisha something. The hand that feeds Elisha, the hand that provides for his servant, is that of God, not the enemies of God. It's not about getting paid for what you're owed. If God gives you what you're owed, you are in serious trouble because you are owed death. You are owed the wages of your sin. It's the grace of God, the gift of God that spares us. And so he's standing before the Lord. The prophet doesn't take his abundance from the earthly powers. Instead, he's relying on God the King, God as his physical provider, the one who is giving to him. And so you would assume then, okay, have you hurt this guy's feelings? This is a powerful prince. He's got an army that's there. Let's jump to verse 17.
Then Naaman said, "If not, please let there be given to your servant 2 mule loads of earth. For from now on your servant will not offer burnt offering or sacrifices to any god but the Lord. In this matter may the Lord pardon your servant when my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, leaning on my arm, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon. When I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon your servant in this matter." And he said to him, "Go in peace."
I think Naaman gets it. He understands that he is before the provider, and he can offer nothing except for need. Even though he has wealth, even though he has power, he recognizes that God is offering something that the physical world around us can't. These powers, these earthly demonic beings, are not capable of standing against the Lord. And so it's interesting to me because one minute Naaman is like, let me give you wealth, let me give you stuff. And Elisha says, no, I don't need anything from you. And then Naaman says, well, I need stuff from you, so let me go back and ask for more. All of a sudden, it's the wealthy prince in need of the poor prophet, and the prophet who is able to give, not the other way around. This is upside down. This is blessed are the poor. This is the edges. That is where the kingdom of God is shining through, not in the courts of the kings, but in the hills, in the edges. This is what Jesus did. He didn't go straight to Jerusalem. Instead, we find him preaching in Nazareth. And one of the disciples, I like the line, can anything good come out of Nazareth? That just seems like not where this would be happening. He sees himself finally in the presence of a real God. But he also knows that he is under the authority of his physical king.
So he's wanting to take physical dirt or territory
Yes.
back to his territory. And as he's bowing down,
His king is worshiping this god in the temple of Rimmon, which means the thunderer. It's it's Baal. This guy's worshiping Baal, and he says, part of my job is I go with the king. The king leans on me.
Yeah, so he's going to have to bow down, but he's going to put dirt down.
And he says, I stand with the Lord, this God.
So this geography would have been very important to them. Taking some dirt
Taking
home.
dirt. Yeah, what's the point? Like,
It's the motive.
Deuteronomy 32 worldview allows you to see something different in this story that I didn't see before.
I don't think this is just about sacred dirt.
But Naaman knew.
Naaman understands, and he's giving a physical manifestation of his faith. In a lot of ways, this is like baptism. It's an outward reflection of an inward change.
Go ahead.
No,
No, I was going to say there's a verse. I think it's in Deuteronomy where the Lord tells them to build him an altar of earth. Would this have any kind of connection to that? Or are these two separate things?
Yeah, the idea is that who made the earth? This is the temple. This is the place that God made. Is there a territorial spirit with power in Syria? Yeah. Yeah, there is. Did God give the nations over to the nation or to these spirits? Yeah, but God hasn't given up on them. That's what the whole book of Jonah is about.
So is he planning on just standing on this dirt and declaring himself
That's what I'm
in
thinking.
Israel? Or is he
He
going to
puts the dirt kind of where he has to kneel down.
Yeah,
and-
listen to what
Okay.
it says. He says, read verse 18, and keep going.
In this matter, may the Lord pardon your servant when my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, leaning on my arm, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon. When I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon your servant in this matter.
Verse
He
19.
said to him, go in peace.
If you walked into the presence of a king in Syria, you bow out of respect, for this is the guy holding the office, whether it's a godly king or an ungodly king. What seems to have happened here is that Naaman is no longer bowing to this king as God, but bowing to him just like he would bow to a court official.
Like out of respect.
Out of respect. You are a spiritual being. I am here with my master, and he's worshiping you. I am not. If you go back to verse 17, he says, if not, please let there be given to your servant 2 mule loads of earth. For from now on your servant will not offer burnt offering or sacrifice to any god but the Lord. This is now his God. I stand with you. He's under the nations. He's one of the goyim. He's not an Israelite. He asks for earth because in his mind the Lord is the God of Israel, and so he's taking the dirt back with him. Now, is there just this little patch of holiness there, and if he steps off of it, suddenly the demons can get him? I always picture people like drawing a pentagram on the ground and like, don't step out of it. It doesn't work. That's not what it's talking about. This is a symbolic way of his saying, I stand apart. In my own home, in my own sacrifices, I'm with you. And if it was me and I was Elisha and this guy said, look, I'm going to go home and I'm going to keep on practicing offerings to Baal in the temple because that's my job, I would say to him, maybe you should think about getting a new job. Maybe you should go. Let's send you down to Jerusalem to get some teaching. Let's send you over to Shiloh or something like that. Instead, what Elisha says is, go in peace. This seems to be okay with Elisha. The prophet doesn't rebuke him. He doesn't teach him differently. He accepts this act of faith as okay. Now, this is uncomfortable for a lot of people reading their Bible because that can't be what it means.
Wonder how he explains to everyone when he's healed. Hey, what happened? I wonder how he explained it.
I imagine he explained it awesomely. He was like, listen, man, the God in Israel is unlike any God ever. He's the Lord of Lords, the God of gods, mighty and awesome. What we're worshiping here, these shadows, these spiritual powers, they are nothing compared to what is on the move down there.
I just think about what he said to his master, who wants to worship this other God. So anyway, I was just thinking out loud.
So Naaman gets it. Naaman has been provided for, both physically and supernaturally. Now we're going to see the servant of the Lord, the other one. There are 2 of them, just like in the garden, 2 trees, 2 servants. Here we go. This guy's name is Gehazi, and it's in verse 19b through 27.
But when Naaman had gone from him a short distance, Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said, See, my master has spared this Naaman the Syrian, in not accepting from his hand what he brought. As the Lord lives, I will run after him and get something from him. So Gehazi followed Naaman, and when Naaman saw someone running after him, he got down from his chariot to meet him and said, Is all well? And he said, All is well. My master has sent me to say, There have just now come to me from the hill country of Ephraim 2 young men of the sons of the prophet. Please give them a talent of silver and 2 changes of clothing. And Naaman said, Be pleased to accept 2 talents. And he urged him to tie up 2 talents of silver in 2 bags and 2 changes of clothing. and laid them on 2 of his servants, and they carried them before Gehazi. And when he came to the hill, he took them from their hand and put them in the house, and he sent the men away, and they departed. He went and stood before his master. And Elisha said to him, Where have you been, Gehazi? And he said, Your servant went nowhere. But he said to them, Did not my heart go when the man turned from his chariot to meet you? Was it a time to accept money and garments, olive orchards and vineyards, sheep and oxen, male servants and female servants? Therefore the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and your descendants forever. So he went out of his presence a leper like snow.
When Elisha is offered money, he says no. When he's offered physical goods, he says no. He says, I am standing in the presence of my Lord. And he views the Lord as his gift giver, as his ring giver, as the one who is providing for him. But his servant, Gehazi, does not feel that way at all. His servant says, I'm owed something. I can get something. This is an opportunity where I can go out there, and because of who I am, I can manipulate this situation to get what I want. And he lies. Right away, this should be setting off satanic elements. This is not the Spirit of God that's moving him. This is the spirit of sin. This is the enemy that's crouching at the gate.
This is a fairly specific lie. Like, do you think there was any kind of root to this and he just kind of riffed off it and turned it into, they came from the hill country. There was 2 of them. They were sons of the prophets. We need this and we need this. Like, it's not just, feels kind of like premeditated or something.
It is premeditated. It's probably something that happened fairly often. You know, people were coming to visit Elisha. Mm-hmm. It calls them the sons of the prophets. These are other prophets. These are men who are training. It doesn't actually mean they're the physical sons of the prophet. But did you catch what it says in verse 24? And when he came to the hill, he took them from their hand and put them in the house and sent the men away, and they departed. And they went and stood near his master. And Elijah said to him, Where have you been? So this is coming back to a high place. This is a return up to a place where God and mankind are going to interact again. The good guy in this story is the Syrian. The bad guy in this story is the servant. It's the guy who knows better. It's the godly guy. He's the problem. And he lies, and it's this very specific lie that he's definitely thinking about on his way out there. And by the way, it makes him sound generous. You know, give me this. Not for me. I'm going to give it away. I'm just a loyal servant of my master. I'm not asking anything for me. These are for these other guys who are coming. And when he returns, did you catch what Elisha says to him?
Oh, yeah. Where have you been, Gehazi?
Does that not sound like God in the Garden of Eden?
It does.
Yeah.
Where are you? Adam, Eve, where are you? Suddenly, we're getting echoes of previous stories. We've gone back up the mountain, and we're seeing 2 very specific reactions to God as provider. Is he the Lord who gives, or are you defining right and wrong for yourself? How did the prophet know that this man, Gehazi, had lied, had asked for stuff?
It feels like a supernatural knowing. Did not my heart go when the man turned from his chariot to meet you?
This line, and this goes back to what Jacob said at the beginning, has caused a lot of people to wonder what exactly was going on with the prophet here. We know that there are times in the Bible where God supernaturally moves people. Philip is a good example of this. It seems as though, remember, that they're at this high place. This is the prophet. The Lord is with him. And this guy tries to sneak off. In my mind, I visualize this God's sends like the drone footage after him, and they like zoom in on him, like everyone is seeing this in the supernatural world. But whether it means that he projects or whether he sees this, the Lord makes it clear to him. What it says is, did not my heart go? Something happens here so that he is well aware of what's going on. This is not natural. This is supernatural. How is it that Elisha is able to overcome the deception? It's not through his own intelligence. It's through his reliance on the provider. Everything about this is not about food, but it is about our needs being provided by the Lord. He is in Eden. He has what he needs. He has purpose. He has his Lord. He has the abundance. Anything that he needs, the Lord provides for him. And then what happens to him? Look at verse 27.
Therefore the leprosy of Naaman shall cling to you and to your descendants forever. So he went out from his presence, a leper like snow.
So he calls out, where have you been? Just like God did to Adam and to Eve in the garden. And what happens to Gehazi? He's exiled, just like Adam and Eve in the garden. And he's not only exiled, he's exiled to death, just like Adam and Eve in the garden. Specifically, it says that he is given leprosy. Well, that sounds like Jeroboam in the story that we read just a few weeks ago with the two calves. Suddenly, God is showing his judgment and his provision. Riches and abundance are not ours to exploit, to steal and plunder, to deceive and to seek our own advancement. God is our king, our provider, just as he was in Eden. Now, does that mean that you shouldn't cook food? You should wait for God to warm it up in the microwave for you? Mm-hmm. Now, the Lord God gave you a brain. Please use it. He wants you to be involved. He wants you doing things, but you're to do them with good intentions, with good motives, not with the intention to serve self, but with the intention to enjoy the goodness of God's world. Adam and Eve were free to eat from all of the trees in the garden. They didn't wait for God to go pick him and bring him a platter. They were to do this. This is life still happening, but they were to view every good and perfect thing in their life as coming down from the Father of lights. In conclusion, I want to point you to the book of Luke, chapter 12, verses 22 through 32. And I just want you to listen to what Jesus says. And he said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not be anxious about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will put on. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than birds? And which of you, by being anxious, can add even a single hour to the span of his life? If then you are not able to do as small a thing as that, why are you anxious about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin. Yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not arrayed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass, which is alive in the field today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, O you of little faith? And do not seek what you are to eat and what you are to drink, nor be worried, for all the nations of the world seek after these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, seek his kingdom, and all these things will be added to you. Fear not, little flock, for it is your Father's good pleasure to give you the kingdom." I think what I'm trying to tell you is this. The Lord is with you, servant of the Lord. Do your best. Enjoy the goodness that is around you, and do not fear the darkness. For even if he should slay us, God will not forsake us. He is with us. The world is at war and breaking down around us, and no amount of cleverness or manipulation is going to get things right. It is only through the power of Christ, only through the peace that passes understanding, only through Jesus, the Lord of Lords, the God of gods, mighty and awesome.